We wondered, if we put children first on every issue, what would happen? And the answer is pro-child politics actually means children are protected and the nation is protected as well.
Women are currently being erased in culture, and I want to amplify their voices and share their stories. Hi, friends. Welcome back to This is a Woman podcast. This week we have Katy Faust, and if you've been listening to the podcast for a bit, you will know that this is the second time we are having her on the podcast. She is just one of my favorite people, and we have her on to talk about her book, Pro-Child Politics. And so Katy Faust, if you didn't listen to the last podcast episode that she was on, she is the founder and president of Them Before Us, a global movement defending children's rights to their mother and father. She publishes, speaks, and testifies widely on marriage and family and why they're matters of justice for children. Her articles have appeared in Newsweek, USA Today, The Federalist, Public Discourse, World Magazine, The Daily Signal, and The Washington Examiner, The American Mind, and The American Conservative. She's on the advisory board for the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, and she helped design the teen edition of CanaVox, which studies sex, marriage, and relationships from a natural law perspective. So, Pro-Child Politics is Katy's new book, and so we dive into what this book is about, what pro-child politics and all of this means in this podcast episode. So, in Pro-Child Politics, Them Before Us and Katy Faust, they mobilize a collection of experts who apply the children before adults approach to their areas of expertise. So, from porn to debt, foreign policy to religious liberty, each chapter explains how a child-first approach isn't just nice. It's a necessity. So the leaders in the book explain how the needs of children are being ignored and propose practical, bold reforms that will ensure the next generation will not only survive, but thrive. And if you are listening to the podcast within the first week or so, but being out, go to This Is a Woman podcast on Instagram and go look how you can enter the giveaway to actually get a signed copy of Katy Faust's book, Pro-Child Politics. So go check that out. But with that, let's dive right in. Welcome back to This is a Woman podcast, Katy. Last time you were on, so many people loved it. I mean, I always love having you on. But today we're going to be diving into a new book of yours, Pro-Child Politics. And you guys recently just posted on the Them Before Us Instagram page kind of how this book just sparked up only, 6-7 months ago, this idea. So let's dive into how this book came to be.
Okay, so as you know, we've done a lot of collaborating with the California Family Council. We love you guys. We just think you are doing an amazing job of salting and lighting down in California. We are so grateful for your clarity on so many different issues. We've largely worked with you guys on matters of marriage and family because my nonprofit, Them Before Us, focuses on putting them, the children, before us, the adults, in matters of marriage and family. When I go speak, when I write articles, I tend to focus on the broader cultural issues as matters of justice for children. So how do you put them before us in matters of life, whether it's abortion or reproductive technologies? How do you put them before us when it comes to protecting children's mind in education, sex ed curriculum, drag queen story hours? How do you put them before us when it comes to protecting children's bodies, whether that's female-only sports, whether that is protecting them from the supposed treatments for transgenderism. And the reality is that when you put children first, when you put them before us, you end up getting great social policy. That's what you get. In fact, I would say that if you are putting children first, the only thing that you're going to get as a result is the right personal decisions and the right political decisions. So I have long wondered, if this could work on all of politics, if you put children first on any issue, would you get great policy? And so my executive director, Josh Wood, said, you should write that book. You should write the book, the Pro-Child Party or something like that. And I was like, no, because I want to have a chapter on ESG, and I want to have a chapter on immigration, and I want to have a chapter on religious liberty and national security and digital technology and debt and taxes. And I'm like, it would take me years to study the debt problem to come to a place where I could write even 3,000 words, clarity and authority with the right kind of prescriptions and descriptions about what's happening in that. I could never do that. And then I was like, oh, but I know the people that can do it. So that's how the book began, was us going, let's find all these subject matter experts and then say, can you write this from our perspective? You know, you, Laura Reese at the Heritage Foundation, who has been doing immigration work for decades, could you take all of that expertise and then tell me what that would look like if it was a matter of child protection? If we put kids first, what would immigration look like? And same thing with, you know, digital technology. You know, what are the lies that we're believing about digital technology? How do those lies harm kids? And what are the truth, and how would that protect kids? And so, I'll stop. I could go on and on and on about why I think this is a critical resource, but it came about because we wondered, if we put children first on every issue, what would happen? And the answer is, pro-child politics actually means children are protected and the nation is protected as well.
Yes, and I love that. And I just kind of going through and being able to read a little bit of the book already. It's interesting because, you know, someone might see this book on the shelf, or they might see it on Amazon, or they're scrolling around, they see pro-child politics, and their mind might go to, okay, this book might talk about education. This book might talk about motherhood and fatherhood, femininity, masculinity, but that's probably about it. And that's what I love about this book, is it's kind of like a no, hold up. This is politics as a whole. This is pro children as a whole. And so, like you said, you dive into ESG, you dive into immigration, or have the people come in and write about that. And I think that's so powerful, because I think as a whole, when you like break down like different religions, different groups, all that Christianity, they tend to think about doing pro children things, but not to the extent of immigration, not to the extent of ESG and all these different things. So how did you, I mean, I know your focus is the whole them before us, like we talked about, but how did you come to the conclusion that we need to start focusing on ESG and immigration and how that does affect children?
Well, I was not exactly sure what it was going to look like when I started, to be honest, because I don't know enough about ESG and immigration to be like, well, that if we put kids first, this is what the policy would look like. But I had suspected that when you are making political decisions, not based on your immediate emotional well being or gratification or your priorities or your ideology or whatever, if you sort of have this national delayed gratification and you prioritize the next generation, it leads to responsibility. It leads to realism. It leads to like using resources well. And it leads to protection of the least of these. And that's ultimately selflessness. So it
Mhm.
does call on adults to put themselves aside, at least in as far as it means that children are protected. So I actually went into this. I'm like, I wonder what's going to happen. You know, I got these experts, but can they do what I'm asking them to do? So interestingly, I had somebody that had been in the publishing world for like 25 years, worked at the top level of like publishing. And she said, I don't think you should do this,
Mm.
because what you're talking about right now is really just going to be a collection of essays. I mean, when you've got this many different authors with this many different subjects, I mean, subjects that don't usually go together. You
Mhm.
don't usually have a chapter on gender ideology right next to a chapter on taxes. I mean,
Yeah.
the econ people are going to want the debt economy taxes chapter, and then, you know, the more socially conservative people are going to want the masculinity, femininity, abortion, reproductive technologies, family. There's not a lot of places where there's crossover there. And it's just going to look like a bunch of disconnected, you know, like mishmash.
Mhm.
And I thought that's a real danger. So when I invited the different contributors to write their chapters, I said, here's the deal. I need 3,000 words. I need it within 4 weeks. And I need you to do it according to this template. There will be no bending on this formula for your chapter. So this is what I told them. Number one, you begin with a real life child who was harmed because we got energy policy wrong, or we got environmental policy wrong, or we got life wrong, or we got race wrong, or we got policing wrong, or we got religious liberty wrong. Like, one of the problems that we have in advancing good conservative policy is we don't humanize
Mhm.
our victims. We are killer when it comes to research, data, natural law, common sense. But when it comes to telling the stories of victims, we're not great at that. So I'm
Mhm.
like, every chapter has the victim is a child, that's where it begins. And then I said, then I want you to outline the major lies that people tell about race or pornography,
Mm.
or the economy. And then tell me how those lies harm kids. So connect the dots between the largely progressive lies and the harms to kids. And then I want you to tell me the truth about race, the truth about national security, the truth about immigration. And then I want you to tell me how those truths would protect kids. If we were to act on those truths, how would children be protected? And then finally, I said, tell me who's done this right. Like, show me how it has worked in real life. I don't want this to be just a theoretical, because honestly, the other side lives in ideology land.
Mhm.
And it all sounds awesome until you touch grass. And so I'm like, tell me what this looks like. Who has done this in real life? Who has executed the truths that you've outlined in your education chapter? Tiffany Justice, co-founder of Moms for Liberty, wrote our chapter on education. And she's like, oh, I'll tell you all the states that have done it right. I'll tell you how they did it. I'll tell you the bills that they passed, and you should do this too. So I think that is what allowed the book to not only come together, but also to be a real book, like a real cohesive project, rather than just sort of people slapping in different styles and different topics with not a lot that's tying them together. So when I signed the contract, I was talking with my publisher. I'm like, this is going to be such a killer project. But inside, I'm like, I have no idea what's about to happen here. Is this going to work out? I'm not exactly sure. And then I got it. I got the drafts. We refined, we edited, we bound it, we put it together. And I looked at it and I'm like, holy shnikes, this is amazing.
Yes, no, and it really is. So the book isn't officially out yet, but people can go pre-order it. The place most people go is Amazon. Is there other places people can go? Do you recommend just hitting up Amazon to get pro-child politics, or?
It is all the places you can get on any major booksellers. Unfortunately, because Amazon dominates 83% of the book market, what happens on Amazon often determines the success or failure of a book.
Mm.
So it's a lot of it is algorithmic ratings, that kind of thing. So I know we hate feeding the Amazon beast, but it does happen to be good for authors, and it does happen to be good for prioritizing when it comes to getting it into people's feeds and notifications, and also ordered by blah 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 blah. But you can go to Barnes and Noble. I think you can go to Walmart.com. I think you can go all the places that books are sold and get it. You can go to Post Hill Press, my publisher. You can order it there. But order it. Order one for you. Order one for your rep or your state senator, because the other incredible thing, especially if you are a conservative, especially if you want to see conservative policies advanced, as Molly Hemingway wrote at the very beginning of this book in her blurb, a funny thing happens when you prioritize kids, you get conservative policy, right? You get actual, real conservatism, not like cold, just stone conservatism. You get flesh and blood, pure, like principled conservatism that has a human face, and the face is child protection. So I think that it's an incredible resource for you to understand the issues, but also you can give it to your conservative rep or lawmaker. And this is the thing. This is such a hack. Like, you can say, I'm the pro-child candidate. Okay. I'm the pro-child candidate, so I can't raise the debt ceiling. I mean, we're already like saddling kids with $70,000 of debt from the moment that they're born that they didn't spend and they didn't decide. I'm the pro-child candidate. I just can't authorize that. Or, me, I'm the pro-child candidate. I can't say yes to that immigration bill because it absolutely leaves not just our own children, but also the children of immigrants completely wide open to victimization. I'm the pro-child candidate. I mean, I really want people to find a better life, but I can't do it at the expense of our kids. I mean, all of the redefinition of the family. I can't do it. I'm the pro-child candidate. Children have a right to their mother and father, and this bill would separate them from their mother and father. So I can't. I'm sorry, I can't greenlight the IVF process. I'm the pro-child candidate. They have a right to life. Unfortunately, IVF victimizes more kids than abortion. I'm the pro-child candidate. So I'm not going to pass your green energy bill because I'm sorry, the way that we're prioritizing energy policy these days, it not only doesn't help the environment, it victimizes kids. I'm the pro-child candidate. I'm not going to go with forcing electronic vehicles on you because that actually deprives children of the energy that they need. You're not going to be able to have healthy kids unless they have abundant, cheap energy. And that's not the way to do it. I mean, like, it is the lens through which you can view every topic and get to good policy. But you can do it not as what you're against, but for who you're for.
Yes, no, I love that. I mean, it really is. You see, again, you have maybe not as much in California, but in some other states, you have these elected officials that ran because they were tired of seeing what was happening to children. And again, in the education system, with fatherlessness, all these different things. But now they're like, I don't know how to really approach taxes. I don't know how to approach debt and all that. And still, they can get this book. They can see the best people on this topic. They can read through it, and then they can say, oh, I can still, like you mentioned, I can say I'm doing this on the debt issue because I'm pro children. And I want to emphasize where you said buy one for yourself and buy one for your state representative. I mean, here in California, if literally everyone that purchased this book also bought it and went and dropped it off at their district office, went and mailed it to them, whatever they did. I mean, think about if there's only like 20 something Republicans here in the state of California for the in the Capitol in Sacramento. Say if each of them ended up getting 10 books and you're thinking, well, I'm not going to do it because maybe someone else already did. Okay, now they give that book to their chief of staff. Now they give that book to their intern and all that. And people are like, but that's not important. No, their chief of staff is who ends up making these policy decisions for them. That intern is normally someone that might be an elected official 10 years from now. So it's like overwhelm their offices. I always so think, what if everyone bought one for all 5, 6, however many school members they have in their district? Like, let's get this in the school. Like, I'm going to go buy one of these. And personally, the mayor of the city that I grew up in and the city I still vote in and the city my family's in is kind of lost the things that he used to stand for. I mean, I'm going to get one of these and go drop it off to him and say, I'd love to read you to read this. And then when you're done, let's have a conversation, a meeting about it. I mean, that is such a wonderful idea to get this in their hands. Also, I think about the amount of, in California, we have a really great turnout of strong pro-life warriors that talk to their elected officials all the time. But now the elected official knows them as like the crazy pro-lifer. Okay, you go drop off this book to them. You still get that chapter of life to them, but you can drop it off and say, hey, this is a great book on debt, on taxes, on all these different things. And now they might step back and say, oh, the crazy pro-lifer is actually talking about things that interest me. Maybe I'll actually read this now.
Yeah.
There's
That's
so
another benefit, because the pro-lifers are going to buy this book because Abby Johnson wrote the life chapter. I mean, like, you're going to hear 3,000 words on Abby Johnson debunking the lies, telling the truth, talking about how kids are victimized. But you're also going to get 3,000 words from Grover Norquist, of Americans for Tax Reform. Like, he's been doing tax reform for like 40 years. His name is like synonymous with like lower the taxes. And so it's like, it is interesting because the people that will come for the environmentalist chapter, because there's not a lot of conservatives there that are writing about environmentalist policy. We did get the president of the American Conservative Coalition, which is a conservative organization fighting for responsible energy policy, to write our environment chapter. So it's like everyone's going to come for that thing that interests them. But in the meantime, they're going to be equipped on all these other issues that not only are sort of hot topics in the voting booth, but also that you're going to engage about at Thanksgiving and that you're going to need to talk to your kids about. So it's 3,000 words, which is nothing. It's nothing. When you ask somebody who has written 4 books on a certain topic to give me 3,000 words on that one issue, like Ken Harrison wrote our masculinity chapter. He's the president of Promise Keepers. He has a lot to say about men and masculinity, but I'm like, you have to do it in 3,000 words. What that means is they boil it down to the very, very essentials. You're only getting the essentials in the book. So I have had my 14-year-old reading it. He's not like a screen addict, but we always put little like requirements in front of screens. So one of them is that he has to read a chapter of a book. And right now he's reading this book. And I'm like, so even though he is going to be reading about energy policy and ESG and immigration, it's words that he can understand, because it doesn't ever go into the deep, deep weeds. It keeps it like very high level, big lies, how those lies impact kids, the truth, how the truth protects kids. And I was on a quick business trip this week and we were texting my 14-year-old and he's like, oh, can I play with so-and-so? I'm like, yeah, just tell me what you read today. And he goes, oh, I read the masculinity chapter. I'm like, oh, what'd you learn? And he's like, the kids are more likely to get involved in crime and be hurt when their dad is gone. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. I'm like, what else? And he goes, well, that real masculinity means that when you get married, you're really, really concerned about your wife and kids. And that's a big, big part of being a real man. And I'm like, okay, go do your little screen time. So it's nice because it sort of functions as a political primer on all these topics. And, the policymakers are going to be able to read it and execute, but so are your teenagers.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I mean, for those of you that are listening right now, and I would say everyone that's listening is like, oh, I know who Abby Johnson is. Love her. Like, she was just on the podcast a couple weeks ago. So she's great. But some of them might be looking and might go, oh, I don't know who Chris Elston, Billboard Chris is, or I don't know who like Grover Norquist is, or these different people. And so, like you said, they might get overwhelmed, like, well, I'm not sure, and all that. One, from someone, so for all you listening, from someone who works in this world, these are the top of the top on these topics. Like, these aren't just random people. I mean, if you know the life issue, you know Abby Johnson's the top of the top. That's how it is for all these other topics in the book. But I want to also, some of these people in this book are extremely intelligent people where sometimes it's a little hard to understand what they're saying. Sometimes when I talk to lawyers, I say, okay, give me your lawyer spiel, but then let's talk about like how the general public can actually understand this. And I think you said it perfectly. These extremely intelligent people that sometimes they're so smart, they don't know how to talk to the normal everyday people that don't focus on these topics. This book broke it down perfectly from those intelligent people, from saying, here's the lies about this issue. Here's a situation where a child has been affected from this issue. And I just want to give a props to you because that is so hard to get some of these people to say, here is it where everyone can understand, from a lawmaker to your high school student. I think that's phenomenal.
Well, it is a credit to several people. The contributors, when you're a master of the subject, and it's not a matter of knowledge, right? And then, but they did have to say, okay, I normally talk about it like this. So I have to change it and see if I can talk about it like this instead. So it did take some work. And then I had some incredible editors who were really involved in the process of how can we make sure that everybody retains their own distinct voice, but it's not a jarring move from one chapter to another, just in terms of like the way that everything kind of flows and is presented. So I'm very grateful, but also it's the power of just natural reality that did most of the heavy lifting. There is something about prioritizing kids that offers this kind of clarity. And honestly, my nonprofit, Them Before Us, which this is a project of Them Before Us, all of the proceeds of the book will go directly back to the nonprofit. So nobody at my organization is making any money here. But it's the power of looking at things from the perspective of the child. It's very simple. It might be difficult. Some of what you learn might be difficult to apply, but it's very simple. And the question is like, who is sacrificing for who? Are you making children sacrifice for you, adults? Or are you adults sacrificing for kids? So there's something very powerful about that natural reality that if you put kids first, you do end up getting common sense, reason, like responsibility. There is something about that child first mentality, that pro-child mentality that actually clarifies so many of the issues. So I don't know if you could do this from any other perspective. I don't know if any other sort of perspective would bring this about. I mean, even if you looked at all these issues through something like the lens of individual rights, I don't know if you'd get this kind of uniformity and agreement. If you looked at it from the perspective of Christianity, maybe, but Christianity does not necessarily direct things in the same way when you're talking about, for example, economics. There's something about prioritizing kids that really makes it clear that all of these issues really really do belong together. They really do belong within the covers of the same book. And I don't really know what other lens would accomplish that.
Absolutely. And I just want to read real quick a little part from the introduction that you wrote, Katy, because I mean, when I read this, I was like, I'm just going to send this 2 paragraphs to everyone and say, here's why you should buy it. I mean, I think it's such a good selling point, but really wraps up what the book is. And so you wrote, there probably isn't another title, Amazon or on your shelf, that covers both race and foreign policy, both masculinity and energy, both border security and digital technology. You can't come up with 19 more diverse topics than the ones you'll find in the following pages. But each chapter has one overarching truth. When we believe the political lies, children are victimized. Pro-child politics requires every adult to prioritize the rights and well-being of children above their self-interest. This means thinking beyond the effect of ideas and policy on the GDP, adult emotional fulfillment, or DEI scores. Our first question on every topic should be, what about the child? How was this bill or cultural trend or international agreement advance children's interests, needs, and rights? And if the answer is it won't, then we must stand against it.
Mhm.
I mean, so good. And I just, I love how it frames everything back to pro children, because I don't know where we lost this in culture and in this society and in politics. But the way I see it, the reason I got into this work is because I want my future children to grow up in a great society, a functioning society. And so I'm like, I see the issues here. That's why I'm going to get involved and make the fight. But I feel like overall, especially in America, just culturally overall, we've lost this idea that the best way to keep the society going politically is to focus on the children. I think it used to be looked like at that.
Yeah.
Like children first, that's how we're going to keep functioning. That's how we're going to keep growing. What can we do now that's going to benefit our children, our grandchildren? And I think that's been lost. And this book really points back to that whole idea. And so I love that you're just like, we're going to point back to it. I mean, hearing it, it's like, oh, this is common sense. Why did we forget about that?
Mhm.
I do want to dive into a little bit, maybe one of like the chapter on femininity. So that, I mean,
Written by like one of the most witty Californians
yes,
on the face of the planet.
yes. And I really think being someone that focuses on the abortion issue, being someone that focuses on women's sports and what's happening there, all that, a lot of it's a result of feminism gone wrong. And so can you give us maybe a little quick synopsis about what people would learn in that femininity chapter?
Yeah. So first of all, you should buy this just for the femininity chapter. It was written by Peachy Keaton, who is the author of Domestic Extremist, which is, I mean, absolute fire. Like, she's the best follow on Twitter. Let's just be really honest here. Like, she has the best hot takes. She's like got incredible like wit, but she also understands what it really means to be a woman and the lies that we're telling women about femininity. So I was like over the moon when she agreed to do this on a breakneck schedule. So I'll just outline the lies that she has. So first of all, the story that she opens with. So everybody has to tell a story of a real life kid who was victimized, and she tells the story of this baby named Carl who was put in daycare when he was just a few months old, and his mother got a phone call, came back to pick him up, and he was dead. And he had choked on something at 6 months old. And um, the mother wrote an essay in the New York Times about this, not necessarily saying you should never put your kid in daycare, but that she felt pressured to put her child back in daycare and that career was the most important thing and that she didn't want to leave her child with somebody else, but she felt like that's what she should do. And it wasn't, her essay was not about daycare or not. But the reality is there's a lot of kids and not a lot of caregivers in daycare. And kids, especially young kids, need constant attention, and not just constant attention from paid staff. They need constant attention from their mothers. There's something about their own mothers who are deeply attuned to the child's need. And the mother is the one that the baby wants. They don't want the person that just started their shift. They want their mom. And further, women want their babies. When you really look at the studies, the stories, the stats, we see that overwhelmingly most women would want to be with their children when they are very young. And if they have the flexibility and the ability to stay home, they will. And this whole notion, right, that we're pushing women with young children back into the workplace is really anti-woman. So ends with that story. And then she goes through the lies of femininity. So the first big lie about femininity is your career is more important than family. And that is something that women have been hearing over and over and over and over for decades, right? You're not a success if you graduate college and get married and stay home and raise babies. No, no, no. Maybe later, maybe in your late 30s. But first, you've got to get your degree, start a career, buy a house, maybe get a master's degree, well established in your career, pay off all your debt, maybe then have kids. I mean, and if you haven't met a good man, maybe have kids on your own, because it's really just about you. And so she like destroys that lie because, we can go through the studies and the stories of women who end up being childless because they prioritize their career. There's a lot of regret there. So then she says, lie number two that women are believing is that marriage is optional for raising children. And this is a massive lie because of the women's well being, but also the children's well being. And that is a little bit brief, which is fine because the family chapter goes into a lot of detail about the harms to children who grew up outside of a marital union. And then she throws in this lie. You would not necessarily think that the next lie that she outlines would be worthy of one of her major 3 points,
Mhm.
but it's that birth control is harmless. And
Mm.
this is something that I think the boomers and even the Gen Xers are like, what on earth? Leave birth control out of this. No big deal. Like, get off my back. No, like, what are you talking about? But I will tell you, the millennials and the Gen Zers are absolutely rejecting birth control because
Mhm.
they are recognizing this alters my mood, this changes my feelings, this has incredible impacts on my body. I understand the connection between fertility struggles in the future and being on birth control now. I want to be in touch with my body. I don't want to circumvent its natural processes. And so she destroys these lies that birth control is just no big deal. You can get on it if you have acne as a teenager, blah, 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 blah. No, like it actually has real life implications for a woman's body, her future children, and even how she thinks about children and their role in her life.
Yeah, and I just had we recently just had Dr. Marguerite Duane on the podcast with Facts About Fertility, and like you said, Gen Z is really starting to be like, hold up on this whole birth control thing. So I love that in the femininity chapter that gets touched on. And one of my favorite facts that I've now learned about birth control and the harms from it is that women, we have our cervical mucus, which is one of the main parts in being able to get pregnant and kind of keep the sperm where it needs to go and get the sperm and egg together. When you're on birth control, the fact that Dr. Duane gave was if you start birth control at 18 and don't get off till 28, so you're on it for 10 years, your cervical mucus, it actually doubles in age. So when you get off the birth control at 28, your cervical mucus is 38 years old. So it's not working as strongly. And so that again, that goes directly with femininity and the lies we've been told by feminism and this whole idea of push having children off. And like you said, I mean, we've hit a point, and like this chapter talks about, we've hit a point in society where it's like people are saying you have to, when you walk into your home, you're either going to have all your degrees and awards on the wall or you're going to have photos of your family. And I think there was a loss in telling women what they can or can't do. And so I love that you guys dive into this. A lot of people that are going to be listening to this podcast episode, they're going to be familiar with they're going to be familiar with the topic of life, of masculinity, femininity. They might not be as familiar with the whole in this section. And something, I don't know if we touched on this yet, how you broke it down into 3 sections: cultural, economic, and national. The economic section, some of these people listening to the podcast today might not be as familiar with this idea. Is there one of the sections in the economic section we can dive into really quickly?
Well, I learned a lot on this section because, if there's sort of 3 legs of the conservative stool, like the social conservatives, the economic conservatives, and then the national security conservatives. And other than like the Heritage Foundation, I don't really know any organization where you can find all these branches of conservatism together because I just exist in the social conservative space. Like, I appreciate and I resonate with the economic conservative arguments because I pay taxes
Yeah.
and I understand, especially as a nonprofit, like how the government can be weaponized against people that they disagree with. And so it's like I have some point of reference for some of that, but I had a lot to learn. I had a lot to learn in the economics sections. So the 5 chapters that are in the economic section is the economy, which is sort of an overview written by Chris Bedford, who was formerly at the Federalist. Now he's at the Blaze, but he's just kind of traveled all across the country, just talking to ordinary moms and dads, farmers, business owners about like what is going on with the way the government is tinkering with the economy and how is it hindering you from being somebody that can provide for your family and provide for your children, and how is what the government is doing hamstringing you to be able to like flourish economically so your children can also flourish. So that was great. And he's a great writer, so that doesn't hurt either. And then Taxes was written by Grover Norquist, who, like I said, is like, you say Grover Norquist and people just go, oh, Taxes. I mean, like, he's that well known.
Yeah.
And so it is so funny, the different personalities of everybody. Grover's like, here's 8 lies on taxes. Like, I'm going to give you 8. I'm going to write just 1 paragraph on each of them, but here's 8 of them. But I'm like, yep, he's right. And there were so many things he said. I'm like, oh, I'll take you through that one. I'm like, oh, I've heard that. Oh, yeah, people have said that. And then he'd be like, this is why it's a lie. I mean, it's just so helpful. And then Bill Kirpin, who's at American Commitment, he wrote on debt. And just understanding the scale of the problem. And honestly, if you're 60 or 70 years old, you're not going to have to deal with it. But the 6-year-olds are, and the 7-year-olds are. And they're all going to be doing it because you wanted some special project in your county that you didn't have to pay for, but that 7-year-old who lives across the country, they will have to pay for it. I mean, it's like the debt chapter kind of like enraged me in ways that I was not expecting, because absolutely it's inhumane, it's unjust. I think he calls it fiscal child abuse. And I'm like, that's exactly what it is, what we're doing in terms of debt. So then we have the energy chapter by Neil Chatterjee. Neil, his bio is so long because he's so good at this. He didn't even have like an association. I'm like, just read the bio.
Yeah.
I mean, he's been doing this forever and ever and ever. And so that was really awesome, because I'm like, you can't just talk about energy in the abstract. Like, you talk about curbing energy or making it more expensive or less accessible, you're playing with the lives of kids. Like, that's really what it comes down to. So it's so helpful for me to just connect those dots, because you hear Green New Deal, you hear all of these like newfangled, oh, we're all going to be, driving electric cars, we're going to be doing wind and solar. And he's like, yeah, and children will freeze and starve. So pick what you want. Pick what you want. And then we have the ESG and the DEI chapter, which is so fascinating, because I think a lot of Americans, especially if you're more in the social conservative realm, you're like, I don't even know what that is. Maybe you've seen like Robbie Starbuck posting a little bit about, John Deere and Harley Davidson, and you're like, I don't even know what's going on. But ESG is environmental, social governance, and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's really just a way to use private corporations to overhaul the social fabric. That's what it is. And it's always kids that pay the price. So I learned a lot from these. And just for the sake of fun, I'll just hit Grover Norquist's like lies about taxes. Because the boy just couldn't stop. I was like, reel it in, honey. All right, here I am trying to find my chapter. Line number 1, this is taxes. Line number 1, you're greedy, right? And like, how many times have you heard like, oh, all these people that want to keep their money, they're just greedy. It's like, no, that's not it. Line number 2, don't worry, somebody else will pay for this new tax I'm proposing, not you, them. And I'm like, yeah, they always say that.
Yes.
Number 3, the new tax will only hit the rich. And he's like, nope, here's how it always hits the middle class and the poor as well. And then he's like, line number 4, big corporations, not you, will pay business tax. And he's like, nope, if business gets taxed, you get taxed. That's how it works. Number 5, we will only bring in this new tax to replace or reduce existing tax. Trust us. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, I was even just listening to, Kamala Harris talking about the child tax credit. How are you going to pay for that? And she's like, well, we're going to tax the tax. You're not going to do it. We're going to tax the tax. We're like, no, like, it's new taxes. And it's new taxes that are going to disproportionately burden parents, which means, and he's like, let's just talk about what taxes are. Taxes mean you get less time with your kids. That's what it means. You work more to get less time with your kids. That's what it is. And I'm like, that's exactly what it is.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I haven't fully read the entire taxes chapter, and I'm excited to, because those are lies, again, like I hear all the time. And when I'm working in this world of politics, I'm like, I can combat any lies about the life issue pretty easily. But that, I'm like, I know it's not right, but I don't know why. Like, so I'm excited to learn from that. But Katy, what is, for everyone listening, what is, when they read this book, what do you want their final takeaway to be from this?
Well, first of all, like you don't have to read it all sitting down. I mean, it kind of can sit on your shelf as a resource, so that when you hear somebody talk about how we're going to push ESG at your company, you can be like, oh, I have something on that, right? You grab it off the shelf, you read the 3,000 words, you go back and you say, this is going to be bad for kids. This is bad for our company, but it's really bad for kids. And you know me, I care about kids. Like, I'm the employee that cares about kids. I'm not on board with this because I don't support things that harm kids, and this harms kids. So like, you can keep it just as a reference on your desk. And so if something comes up and the Democrats are proposing some kind of, lax border policy or amnesty or whatever, you can pull it up. You can look at the immigration chapter. You can, good God, that woman footnoted. I mean, like, you can go and get all of the best sources refuting the progressive lies on immigration. And you will be able to filter through whatever proposals the Democrats or the Republicans are making when it comes to their immigration policy, and very easily go, that's bad for kids. That's good for kids. I'm going to go with the one that's good for kids. So I hope it's going to be a resource. It certainly can be an introduction for a lot of the topics for which a lot of us are not as familiar, on things like, the other chapter that I wrote was the family chapter. I, wrote an entire book on family. Most of the podcasts that I do have to do with family. You get 3,000 very tight, condensed words, like concentrated arguments on the family. So if somebody comes at you and they're like, kids don't need moms and dads, they just need to be safe and loved, right? You grab it off the shelf, you'd be like, well, interesting, you should say that, because the very people who are most likely to ensure children will be safe and loved is their married mother and father. So like, we want it to be something like an arrow in your quiver when you come upon a battle and you need something targeted. But what I really want is I want everybody to take on an attitude of child protection, regardless of what topic they're talking about. Sometimes it is going to infringe on what you want. And that's how it's supposed to be. Because the only alternative is for children to be infringed because of what we want. And that is called injustice. So all of us need to take on this posture of child protection. It is going to be good for kids, but it is also going to be good for the nation. It is the right kind of filter through which we should look at every political issue, because you come out on the other side with great policy. You also just tactically sort of exempt yourself from always falling into the trap of being anti-immigration, anti-woman, anti-science. Like, no, I'm not. I'm pro-child. I'm pro-child. So it's a bit of a, like, water off the back of the duck kind of, no, your accusations aren't going to stick to me anymore. I know what I believe, and I know that they have a direct connection to child protection. So you can call me those names, but my true identity politically is I'm the pro-child voter. I'm the pro-child candidate. I'm the pro-child mom. I am the pro-child advocate, right? In whatever conversation I'm in or whatever issue I'm voting on, I am going to be pro-child.
Love that. Yes, I know. So many people, I think people are scared to get called those things. You're anti this, anti that. And this will set you up to just say, I'm just pro child. So if you are listening, go check this out on Amazon. In the show notes, you'll be able to find the link to be able to go pre-order it. But also, like Katy, as we were talking, just what came to my mind is, if you are a mom or dad listening, if you have children that are in high school or above, buy it and make this like your next 2-month family book to go through, because there are so many. I mean, I think about my family. I have 3 brothers, so I'm the only girl. Growing up, if my mom were to be like, hey, we're going to go and listen to this podcast about the Bible together, or we're going to read through this thing about the Bible together, like, my brothers are all great, strong Christians, but they'll be the first to be like, ugh, again, mom. But if my mom were to be like, hey, we're going to go through this like politics book, pro-child politics, my brothers would be like, okay, like, sounds interesting, not even recognizing like it's going to be, and again, it's not necessarily like Christianity based, but it has ideals that Christian families can bring in. And I just think so many parents are like, how do we talk to our kids about these things? How do we push back against what they're seeing on TikTok and what their teachers are saying? And this book hits it all. So my mind just came to like family, like a family book club. Sit down with your kids, and you're also going to be learning about topics you probably don't know as a parent. So I just think this is going to be a big family book study book. So
I love that idea. And I will say, like, harkening back to the book that was published right before this, our book that came out last year is called Raising Conservative Kids in a Woke City. And it's because my co-author Stacy and I live in Seattle. Our kids have gone to public school. Like, how do you inculcate a biblical Christian conservative worldview in your kids when everything is against you? And one of the principles that we recommend is exactly what you just said. You don't need a special program. You don't have to send them to a certain camp. You don't have to enroll them in a specific school. You just invite them into what you're already doing. If you're reading a book, you read the book together. if you're listening, my kids, I listen to way too many podcasts. They walk in, I've got my AirPods in, they're right next to me. I just pop an AirPod in their ear. And for the 7 minutes when they're in the kitchen with me, they're also listening to the Federalist radio hour, or they're also listening to, trigonometry or whatever it is. And then they leave, they hand me the AirPod and they walk out. Like, just invite your kids into what you're already doing, right? It is just such a hack to literally put those clear-eyed conservative, biblical, and now pro-child glasses onto their face, right? You're reading this, you're getting the pro-child lens, you read it together, they get the pro-child lens.
Amazing. And so, Katy, what is the best way, other than finding the book on Amazon, what is the best way for people just to find out more about you, Them Before Us, all the other books that you have out?
Yes, there's a pro-child politics page, website you can go check out if you want. There's a katyfaust.com page if you want to know everything that I'm up to, all of the different projects that I'm involved in. The best place to go is probably thembeforeus.com. You should subscribe to our newsletter. We are exploding in terms of opportunities and projects. We are, people have asked me forever, what are you trying to do here? What are you trying to do with this Them Before Us thing? And I've just said, global takeover. We're going to take over the world. And I'm not kidding. We are going to take over the world. The takeover is in process. And you should join us. Follow us, support us. We need everybody, all hands on deck for this project, because children are under attack in every way that a child can be under attack. And it's going to take all of us protecting them. So come to thembeforeus.com, subscribe, donate if you can. Follow our work on social media. We need every one of you.
Amazing. And so for all of you that are listening and are like, okay, I'm going to do all that, check the show notes, all the links, all the social media for Them Before Us, Katy, all that will be down there so you can follow along. I absolutely recommend following along. I mean, every time I've heard you speak in person, Katy, I've not been to something that you've spoken at that didn't end in a standing ovation. It just phenomenal work that always comes from you. So everyone go check out more about Them Before Us, Katy Faust, and go grab the book, Pro-Child Politics. But thanks so much for being on, Katy.
This is the best. Thank you for having me.